The faint, sterile hum of the laboratory was a sound I'd grown to love. It was the sound of precision, of control. Under the powerful lens of my microscope, a single drop of clear liquid hung from the tip of a pipette, shimmering like a tiny, suspended world. I gently squeezed the bulb, releasing the drop onto the surface of a green leaf. It spread instantly, an invisible film of influence. I leaned back, my eyes still focused on the monitor displaying the magnified image. Pheromones, nature's most elegant form of communication. A single molecule could send an entire colony of ants into a frenzy, driving them toward a source of food, or a new home, or simply away from danger. It was a language without words, an instruction without argument. It was pure, undeniable influence. I watched as the cellular structure of the leaf seemed to absorb the compound, becoming a silent, irresistible beacon. Nature has unbreakable laws. So does truth. It's just that sometimes, you have to use one to expose the other. For months earlier, something wasn't right. I felt it in my bones. A low, persistent hum of anxiety that had become the soundtrack to my days. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the wilting orchid on the windowsill. Its delicate purple petals, once so vibrant, now drooped with a sorrowful air. I had done everything for this plant. The right amount of indirect sunlight, a precise watering schedule, the perfect blend of bark and moss for its roots. Still, it was fading, just like my marriage. The sound of the shower running upstairs was a familiar rhythm, a normal Tuesday morning sound. Charles was getting ready for work, but lately, nothing felt normal. Everything felt off. We had been married for 11 years. Charles and I lived in a charming two-story house in a quiet Boston suburb. The kind with a wrap-around porch and a garden that was the envy of the neighborhood. That garden was my sanctuary. As a botanist at the Arnold Arboretum, I understood the language of plants, their needs, their signs of distress, their quiet resilience. At 39, I had built a career I was proud of, specializing in the complex biochemistry of rare flora. Charles, at 42, was a successful investment banker. His ambition had bought us this beautiful house, financial security, and the polished veneer of a perfect life. From the outside, we were the couple people looked up to. But beneath the surface, hairline fractures were spreading. It started with things so small I felt foolish for even noticing them. The way Charles's phone, which used to lie face up on the counter, was now always face down, or how it would suddenly go silent when I entered the room. He'd begun working late more frequently in the past 3 months, blaming a demanding new account. He'd also developed a sudden interest in his appearance. New, expensive shirts replaced his old ones. A different cologne, sharp and woodsy, had replaced the familiar scent he'd worn for years. More time at the gym. None of these things were damning on their own, but together, they formed a constellation of doubt in my mind, a pattern I couldn't unsee. "Hey, I'm heading out," Charles called as he came down the stairs. He was adjusting the cufflinks on his tailored shirt, his dark hair perfectly styled, not a single strand out of place. He was always meticulous. I turned from the window, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my hazel eyes. "Do you want some coffee before you go?" "No time," he replied, grabbing his briefcase from its spot by the door. "I've got that big meeting with the investors from Chicago today. Remember? Might be a late one." Chicago, another business trip that had appeared on his calendar with suspicious suddenness. "Right," I nodded, trying to keep my voice neutral. "The Chicago meeting." He paused, his hand on the doorknob. His eyes narrowed slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said quickly, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "Just confirming." "I heard you." He set his briefcase down with deliberate slowness, a sign of his growing irritation. "You've got that tone again." "Alex, what tone?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. "That tone, the one that sounds like an accusation." He crossed his arms. "What's going on? Just say whatever it is you're thinking. Let's not do this dance." I hesitated. We had been down this road before. and it never ended well for me. But the gnawing feeling in my stomach, the one that had been my constant companion for weeks, wouldn't let me stay silent. "It's just, you've been so distant lately," I began, my voice softer than I intended. "All these late nights, these sudden meetings, the business trips, it feels like something has changed." A heavy sigh escaped him. He ran a hand over his face in a gesture of pure exhaustion. "Not this again. Alex, I thought we were past this. We never actually talked about it." I pointed out gently. "You just dismissed my concerns last time. Because they're baseless." His voice rose slightly, and I flinched. "I'm working my tail off for us. The Sanders account is huge. You know how important this is for my career, for our future. This paranoia has to stop." The word stung like a slap. Paranoia. As if my intuition was a character flaw, a mental illness. As if the evidence my own senses were gathering was nothing more than irrational fear. "I'm not paranoid," I said quietly, looking down at my hands. "Something feels different between us. I can feel it. I can't just ignore that." His expression softened then, but it was a practiced, rehearsed kind of softness. It didn't reach his eyes. He crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides and placed his hands on my shoulders, his grip firm. "Nothing is different," he assured me, his voice now smooth as silk, "except that I'm under a tremendous amount of pressure at work. And honestly, it doesn't help to come home to accusations. It makes me feel like I can't win." A familiar wave of guilt washed over me. He was right. He worked so hard. Was I being unfair? Was I inventing problems where none existed? Maybe the stress was making me imagine things. Maybe I was the one creating the distance I was so afraid of. "I'm sorry," I found myself saying, the words tasting like surrender. "I don't want to add to your stress." His smile was immediate, and I couldn't help but notice the flicker of victory in it. "Thank you." He leaned in and kissed my cheek. It was a quick, dry kiss that held no warmth. As he pulled back, I caught a whiff of that new cologne. Expensive, subtle, and completely foreign. Another small change. Another piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. "I'll try not to be too late," he promised, retrieving his briefcase. He was already halfway out the door when he called over his shoulder, "Love you." The door clicked shut before I could respond. I stood alone in the sun-drenched kitchen, the silence ringing in my ears. The interaction had left me feeling both relieved and deeply unsettled. Was he right? Was I becoming a paranoid, nagging wife? I turned back to the orchid, its drooping petals a mirror of my own spirit. I gently touched one of them. It felt papery and lifeless. Plants didn't lie. When something was wrong, insufficient light, improper watering, poor soil conditions, they showed it. Their distress was honest. People were more complicated. People could hide the truth. They could deflect. They could convince you that the wilting you saw with your own eyes wasn't real at all. They could make you believe you were the one who was sick. I sighed and glanced at the clock on the stove. I needed to get ready for work. I loved my job. In the ordered world of the Arboretum, among the quiet dignity of the trees and the scientific certainty of my research, I felt grounded. It was a world that made sense. A world where facts were facts. As I headed upstairs to my own shower, my phone buzzed with a text message. I picked it up from the hall table, expecting it to be a reminder from my assistant about my morning meeting. But the name on the screen made me frown. It was Frank Miller. Frank had been Charles's best friend since college, his roommate, his best man, the one person who knew Charles longer and better than I did. We'd known each other for over a decade, and in all that time, we'd developed a warm but distant relationship. He was Charles's friend, first and foremost. "Hey, Alex, any chance we could grab coffee this week? There's something I need to talk to you about." The request was so unusual, it sent a small jolt through my system. In all the years I'd known Frank, he had never once asked to meet with me alone. Never. He was a friendly, easygoing guy, but our interactions were always in the context of couples' dinners or backyard barbecues. With Charles and Frank's girlfriend, Susan, present, What could he possibly want to discuss with me that didn't involve Charles? My thumbs hovered over the screen. A strange sense of foreboding settled in my chest, heavy and cold. My intuition, the one Charles had just called paranoia, was screaming at me now. This was important. This was connected to the feeling that had been haunting me for months. With a deep breath, I typed my reply. Sure. Frank, when were you thinking? His response came almost immediately. Tomorrow afternoon, 3 o'clock, the Riverside Cafe on Memorial Drive. I'll be there. I typed back, my hand trembling slightly as I hit send. Something was coming. The truth, or perhaps just another lie. I wasn't sure which was worse. All I knew was that tomorrow at 3 o'clock, my carefully cultivated, perfectly polished world was about to be shaken to its very roots. That evening, Charles arrived home just after 9, looking tired from his long day. He loosened his tie as he walked through the door, the gesture practiced and weary. I was curled up on the couch, a book on plant pathology open in my lap. Though my mind had been too preoccupied to absorb a single word, my thoughts kept circling back to my impending meeting with Frank, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach with each passing hour. How was the meeting? I asked, marking my place and setting the book aside. I tried to sound casual, like any other night. Exhaustive. Charles replied vaguely, dropping his briefcase by the door. We're making progress with the Chicago investors, but it's a slow grind. How was your day? Fine, I said. I took a steadying breath. I heard from Frank today. We're meeting for coffee tomorrow. I watched his face carefully, searching for any reaction, any flicker of emotion that would betray him. For a split second, I saw it. A brief flash of something in his eyes. Was it surprise? Concern? Panic? It was gone as quickly as it appeared, smoothed over by a mask of casual indifference. Oh, he said, walking toward the kitchen to get a glass of water. What's that about? He didn't say, just that he wanted to talk about something. Charles shrugged, but his nonchalance seemed forced, a little too rehearsed. Probably wants advice on Susan's birthday gift or something. You know how hopeless he is with that stuff. I nodded, playing along, even though every instinct I possessed told me it wasn't about a birthday gift. Maybe. He disappeared upstairs to shower, and a sudden, shameful impulse took hold of me. I walked over to his suit jacket, which he draped over a dining chair. My hands trembled as I slipped them into the pockets, something I'd never done before in our entire marriage. I felt like a trespasser in my own home. I found nothing. No receipts from fancy restaurants. No ticket stubs. No scribbled phone numbers. Just his wallet, his keys, and a few stray business cards. I felt a pang of guilt mixed with frustration. He was either innocent or very, very careful. Later that night, as we lay in bed, the space between us felt like a vast, cold ocean. He fell asleep almost instantly, his breathing even and untroubled. I stared at the ceiling, wide awake, my mind racing. Was I making a terrible mistake? Was I about to blow up my life over a simple meeting about a birthday gift? All the evidencier lack thereof suggested Charles was telling the truth. He was just a hard-working, stressed-out husband, and I was his paranoid wife. Yet the alarm bell inside me continued to ring, a persistent, silent scream that I couldn't ignore. The next afternoon, I found myself sitting at a corner table in the Riverside Cafe, the Charles River glittering outside the large picture window. I nursed a cup of chamomile tea, its calming properties doing nothing to soothe the frantic fluttering in my chest. I watched the door, my heart hammering against my ribs every time it opened. Frank arrived precisely at 3. He spotted me and gave a small, hesitant wave. He ordered a black coffee at the counter and sat across from me, his expression uncharacteristically serious. The usual easygoing smile that was a permanent fixture on his face was gone, replaced by a deep line of worry between his brows. "Thanks for meeting me, Alex," he said, his voice low. He fidgeted with his coffee cup, avoiding my eyes. I've been going back and forth about whether to have this conversation. My heart rate quickened. This was it. What's going on? Frank. He finally looked at me directly. His gaze filled with a pained sympathy that made my stomach drop. It's about Charles. And in that moment, before he said another word, I knew with a certainty that was as absolute and devastating as a physical blow. My intuition hadn't been a sign of paranoia. It had been a warning. There's no easy way to say this. Frank continued, his voice barely above a whisper. But he's not being honest with you. And I can't stand by and watch it happen anymore. My hands tightened around my teacup, the porcelain cold against my numb fingers. The world seemed to tilt beneath me, the cheerful chatter of the cafe fading into a dull roar. The truth was coming, and despite having suspected it for months, I realized I wasn't ready for it at all. How long have you known? I asked, my voice a strained whisper. The question hung between us, heavy and suffocating. Frank stared into the black depths of his coffee. I suspected something was off about 2 months ago, but I only knew for certain last week. I took a deep, shaky breath, steeling myself. Tell me everything. He's been seeing someone, Frank said, his words careful and measured, like a doctor delivering a fatal diagnosis. Her name is Tiffany Andrews. She's 28, works at the marketing firm that handles some of his company's accounts. That's how they met. Tiffany Andrews. The name struck me, sharp and painful. The shadow that had been hovering at the edges of my life now had a name. It was young. It was real. How serious is it? I asked, surprising myself with the steadiness of my own voice. It felt like I was floating outside my body, watching a stranger have this conversation. Frank shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I'm not sure about that part, but I know it's been going on for at least 3 months. 3 months. My mind raced, retracing the timeline. The new cologne, the late nights, the sudden interest in the gym. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Those Chicago trips, I said softly, the realization dawning on me. They're not real, are they? Frank shook his head, his expression grim. No, he doesn't go to Chicago. He told me he rents a hotel room downtown. Says it's easier than trying to sneak around. Each word was another crack in the foundation of my life. My home, my marriage, my future of it built on a lie. But I needed to know it all. I needed the whole, ugly truth. Do you have proof? I asked, hating the desperate, pathetic sound of the question, but needing something tangible, something he couldn't dismiss or explain away with his smooth, practiced logic. Frank hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. I didn't want to show you this, Alex. I really didn't. But you deserve to know the truth. He scrolled through his photo gallery for a moment and then turned the screen toward me. I took this last Friday night. I was meeting a client at the Westbrook Hotel for drinks, and I saw them in the restaurant. I stared at the photo, and my world didn't just tilt. It shattered. There was Charles, my husband of 11 years, with his arm wrapped possessively around a young woman with platinum blonde hair and bright red lipstick. They were seated at a corner table, their heads bent close together, their bodies angled toward each other in a way that screamed intimacy. The woman Tiffany was looking up at him with an expression of pure adoration, and he was gazing back at her with a look of unmistakable desire. It was the look he used to give me years ago, before we became a comfortable habit, before the lies. He saw me. Frank continued quietly, pulling my attention from the devastating image. Across the restaurant, I've never seen anyone look so terrified. He came to my place the next morning, begging me not to tell you. Said it was just a fling, that it didn't mean anything, and you didn't believe him. I said, finally tearing my eyes away from the phone. My own reflection in the dark screen looked pale and hollowed out. No, Frank replied firmly. I've known Charles for 23 years. He's my oldest friend. But what he's doing to you, it isn't right. You deserve better. Alex. I handed the phone back, my fingers trembling so hard I could barely hold it. Thank you for telling me, I managed to say. I know it couldn't have been easy. If he asks, I'll deny everything. Frank warned, his expression serious. "I can't have him know it was me. I'm sorry. But I understand." I cut him off, nodding. I wouldn't put him in that position. This was my battle to fight now. "I won't mention your name." We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the revelation settling round us like a thick fog. I felt strangely numb, as if my emotions had been short-circuited by the overload of pain and betrayal. All the anxiety, the self-doubt, the feeling of going crazy, it had all vanished, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. "What will you do now?" Frank finally asked, his voice gentle. I took a slow sip of my now-cold tea. The chamomile tasted bitter. "I don't know yet," I said, looking out the window at the river, at the cars streaming past, at a world that was still moving on as if mine hadn't just come to a complete stop. "But whatever it is," I added, turning back to meet his gaze, my voice gaining a sliver of the strength I thought I had lost. "I'll do it on my own terms." As we parted ways outside the cafe, Frank gave me an awkward, sympathetic pat on the shoulder. "I'm sorry, Alex, for all of it." I managed a tight smile. "Don't be. The truth hurts, but living a lie is worse." He nodded and walked away, leaving me alone on the sidewalk. I stood there for a long time, watching the flow of traffic, my mind a chaotic swirl of images and emotions. The photo, the name, the lies, and underneath it all, a strange, powerful undercurrent of relief. I wasn't crazy. My intuition had been right all along, and in a world that had suddenly turned upside down, that single, solid fact was the only thing I had left to hold on to. I drove home in a fog, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The familiar streets of our neighborhood, lined with manicured lawns and stately colonial houses, looked alien to me. It felt like I was watching a movie of my own life, a film where I had just discovered the script was a lie. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the initial shock had begun to recede, replaced by a strange and chilling calm. The suspicion and uncertainty that had plagued me for months were gone. In their place was the cold, hard weight of knowledge. There was a bizarre relief in it, in finally knowing that I wasn't losing my mind. My intuition, the very thing Charles had tried to weaponize against me, had been my most reliable guide all along. The house was empty when I stepped inside. The silence, which usually felt peaceful after a day at work, now felt heavy with deceit. I walked through the rooms I had so lovingly decorated, seeing them now through new eyes. The framed wedding photo on the mantelpiece on our wedding day, smiling, young, full of a hope that now seemed naive. The vacation souvenirs we'd collected, each one a marker of a memory that was now tainted. The beautiful garden visible through the back windows, the one I had cultivated with such care while he was cultivating a secret life. How much of it had been real? How much had been a performance? I found myself standing at the entrance to Charles's office. It was a space I rarely entered, a room I had always respected as his private domain. Now, I felt no such compunction. Betrayal had voided all contracts of respect and privacy. I stepped inside, closing the door softly behind me. The room smelled of him that knew, would see cologne, leather, and old paper. I sat down in his expensive ergonomic chair and stared at the massive oak desk. For a moment, I just sat there, breathing in the scent of his lies. Then, with a resolve that felt foreign and yet deeply familiar, I began my search. I was no longer a grieving wife. I was a scientist gathering data. I started methodically, drawer by drawer. The top drawers were filled with office supplies, organized with his typical precision. The side drawers held files, neatly labeled taxes, investments, mortgage. I scanned them briefly, but this wasn't what I was looking for. His betrayal wasn't financial, not yet anyway. It was personal. In the bottom drawer, tucked beneath a stack of old file folders, I found it. A small, elegant box from an upscale jewelry store in the city. One I knew was ridiculously expensive. My heart hammered against my ribs as I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a delicate gold bracelet with a single heart-shaped charm. It was pretty, dainty, and completely wrong for me. My taste was simpler, more understated. This was a gift for someone else. The receipt was still tucked into the box. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. The date was from 2 weeks ago. The amount was nearly $800. It was a significant purchase, one he had never mentioned, a gift he had certainly never given to me. Charles hadn't bought me jewelry in years. He always said he preferred to invest our money in more practical assets. Apparently, Tiffany Andrews was a practical asset. A cold fury, pure and sharp, sliced through my numbness. He hadn't just lied and cheated. He had taken the money we earned together, the money I had contributed to our shared future, and spent it on a trinket for his mistress. The insult was profound. I carefully placed the bracelet and the receipt back in the box, returned it to its exact spot beneath the files, and gently closed the drawer. He would never know I had been in here. He would never know I had found it. A plan, vague at first but quickly gaining clarity, began to form in the quiet, methodical corners of my mind. Charles had been so careful, so meticulous in covering his tracks. He had made me feel paranoid, irrational, and unstable for daring to suspect him. Now it was my turn to be careful. It was my turn to be calculating. I left his office and went out into my garden, my sanctuary. The late afternoon sun warmed my skin as I knelt in the soil, the familiar scent of earth and green leaves calming my racing thoughts. I began to weed the rose bed, my hands moving with practiced efficiency. With each weed I pulled, my anger solidified into purpose. He had underestimated me. He saw me as an emotional, intuitive woman, someone whose feelings could be easily dismissed as hysteria. He had forgotten that I was also a scientist, trained to observe, to analyze, to understand cause and effect. I spent the next hour in the garden, finding solace among the plants that had never betrayed me. As I trimmed the deadwood from my prize-winning roses and pulled the invasive weeds that threatened to choke them, my thoughts crystallized. He wanted to play games? Fine. But he was about to find out that I knew the rules better than he did. By the time I heard his car pull into the driveway, I knew exactly what I was going to do. "Hey," he called as he entered through the back door. He found me washing soil from my hands at the kitchen sink. "You're up late." "Just finishing some gardening," I replied, my voice perfectly neutral. I turned, drying my hands on a kitchen towel, and gave him a small, placid smile. "How was your day?" "Long," he said, setting his briefcase down, "but productive. I think we're making real progress with the Chicago investors." The lie rolled off his tongue so effortlessly that I almost had to admire his skill. "Almost. That's good," I replied. I paused, letting the silence hang for a moment before I spoke again. "Actually, Charles, I wanted to talk to you about something." A flicker of weariness crossed his face. He was clearly bracing for another confrontation, another round of my paranoia. "I've been thinking about what you said this morning," I began, my voice soft and contrite. I walked over to the table and sat down, gesturing for him to join me. "About me being paranoid." His posture relaxed slightly. He was intrigued. And you were right," I said, looking down at my hands as if in shame. I forced a small, apologetic smile. "I've been under a lot of stress at work myself, and I think I've been letting my imagination run wild, creating problems that don't exist. It was unfair to you." The relief on his face was so palpable it was almost comical. It was like watching a switch being flipped. His guarded expression melted away, replaced by a warm, magnanimous smile. "I'm glad you can see that, Alex," he said, reaching across the table to cover my hand with his. His touch felt like a spider crawling on my skin, but I didn't pull away. "I've only ever been focused on my work, on building our future. I know that now." I nodded, meeting his gaze with what I hoped looked like sincere remorse. "And to prove it, I think you should go on that camping trip you've been talking about, the one with the guys from work." He blinked, clearly surprised by the suggestion. "Really? You've been so against it. You said you didn't want to spend the weekend alone. That was the old, paranoid me, I said with a dismissive wave of my hand. The new me thinks you deserve some time to unwind. You've been working so hard. You need a break. When is it again? This weekend? Yeah, he confirmed, still looking slightly bewildered by my sudden change of heart. This Friday through Sunday. Perfect, I said, my smile widening. You should go. I insist. You deserve it. Later that night, as Charles slept peacefully beside meth deep, untroubled sleep of a man who believes he has gotten away with everything, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind was racing, calculating, planning. The camping trip. It was the perfect opportunity. A weekend away from me, away from our home. A weekend he believed would be spent with his mistress. A weekend that would give me the time and space I needed to put the first phase of my plan into motion. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully managed his emotional, irrational wife. He had no idea that the game had just begun. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. After Charles left for the office, humming a cheerful tune and already anticipating his weekend getaway, I picked up the phone and called in sick to work. It was a rare occurrence for me, so my director expressed nothing but concern, telling me to take all the time I needed to feel better. Oh, I plan to, I murmured to myself after hanging up. I'm starting to feel better already. My destination wasn't the doctor's office or the pharmacy. I drove to a large, sprawling gardening supply store on the outskirts of Boston, the kind of place that catered to serious horticulturalists and commercial farmers. As one of their most knowledgeable and frequent customers, the staff greeted me by name. Alexandra, good to see you, called Ted, the elderly owner who had become something of a mentor to me over the years. His hands were perpetually stained with soil, and he had a kind, weathered face. If you're here for those Japanese maple saplings, you're in luck. A new shipment just arrived. Not today, Ted. I smiled, my voice smooth and professional. I'm actually here for something a bit more specific, for an experiment I'm conducting at the Arboretum. His eyes lit up with interest. Oh, what are you working on now? I launched into a carefully constructed narrative, weaving just enough scientific truth into my fiction to make it completely plausible. We're exploring new methods of organic pest control, I explained. Specifically, how we can use pheromones to divert destructive insect colonies away from vulnerable native plant species. The theory is that we can create a more attractive, alternative food source and lure them away without using any harmful chemicals. Ted nodded, completely engrossed. Fascinating. A honeypot for bugs. Essentially. Exactly. I confirmed. I need a powerful, concentrated, and natural anti-attractant, something with a synthetic queen pheromone. If possible, the kind that worker ants find irresistible, that signals a high-value food source. He led me to a special section of the store, past the bags of fertilizer and rows of shiny shovels, to a locked cabinet filled with organic compounds and specialized biological agents. He unlocked it and pulled out a small, unlabeled glass bottle filled with a clear, viscous liquid. This is the good stuff, he said, holding it up to the light. We usually only sell this to organic vineyards. It's completely odorless to humans, but to an ant, it smells like an all-you-can-eat buffet. A single drop can draw in every foraging ant within a 50-yard radius. It's perfect, I said, my heart giving a little flutter of excitement. This was the weapon I had been looking for. Elegant, discreet, and devastatingly effective. Incredibly fascinating research you're doing, Alexandra, Ted commented as he rang up my purchase, along with a few other items I added. To make the transaction look less suspicious, a bag of orchid potting mix, some gardening gloves. Never thought about using these compounds for plant protection in that way. It's all about finding natural solutions, I replied smoothly, handing him my credit card. Chemical pesticides do more harm than good in the long run. Sometimes you have to work with nature, not against it. That evening, When I was sure Charles was tied up in his final Chicago investor meetings before his trip, I began my work. I pulled his camping gear from the storage closet in the basement, his high-tech sleeping bag, his tent, the duffel bag he used for his clothes. I laid everything out on the clean basement floor. Wearing the new pair of gardening gloves, I opened the small glass bottle. As Ted had promised, the liquid was completely colorless and had no discernible scent. Using an eyedropper I'd brought home from the lab, I began to apply the antitractant with scientific precision. A few drops on the zipper of his sleeping bag. A few more worked into the seams of his tent. I carefully applied a diluted solution to the collars and cuffs of the shirts he had packed, the waistband of his hiking pants, the insides of his socks. I didn't use enough to make the fabric damp or to be immediately noticeable, but it was more than sufficient to do the job. Once he was settled at his campsite, or more likely, the luxurious rental cabin he'd probably booked with Tiffany, and his body heat warmed the fabric, the pheromones would activate, sending out an irresistible invitation to any foraging ants in the vicinity. When I was finished, I packed all his gear back up, leaving no trace of my work. I disposed of the bottle and gloves in a public trash can miles from our home. There was no evidence, nothing to connect me to what was about to happen. It was the perfect, victimless crime-ecept. Of course, that Charles was very much the victim. When he finally arrived home, late and flush with the excitement of his impending tryst, he found me in the kitchen, pulling his favorite meal from the oven, grilled steak with roasted potatoes and asparagus. The aroma filled the house. "Wow," he said, clearly pleased by the special treatment. He dropped his briefcase and came over to kiss me on the cheek. I had to fight the urge to recoil. "What's all this for?" "Just wanted to send you off on your trip with a nice meal," I replied, my smile feeling more genuine than it had in days. It was the smile of a predator watching its prey walk willingly into a trap. "And to apologize again for being so difficult lately. I want you to go have fun and not worry about me for a second." He wrapped his arms around me in a hug that felt entirely hollow. "You have no idea how much I needed to hear that, Alex." "Oh, I think I do," I thought. I poured him a generous glass of the expensive Cabernet Sauvignon he preferred, and raised my own glass in a toast to a relaxing, stress-free weekend, I said. He clinked his glass against mine, his eyes gleaming. "To understanding wives." I took a sip of my wine, the rich liquid tasting of sweet, impending victory. "To getting exactly what we deserve," I murmured. Friday morning arrived. Bright and sunny, a perfect day for camping. Charles loaded his gear into his SUV, his movements light and energetic. I stood in the driveway, playing the role of the supportive, reformed wife to perfection. "Have a great time," I said, giving him a quick, chaste kiss. I made sure to brush my hand against the sleeve of his treated jacket. "Don't worry about me. I'll keep busy with the garden. I'll be back Sunday evening," he promised. "And hey," he added, his expression turning serious for a moment, "try not to overthink things while I'm gone. Okay? No more paranoia. Promise," I said, crossing my heart with a playful innocence that made him chuckle. I watched him drive away, maintaining my cheerful smile until his car disappeared around the corner. Only then did I allow my expression to harden, a cold, fierce satisfaction settling in my eyes. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Phase 1 of my plan was complete. Now, all I had to do was wait. The rest of Friday and most of Saturday passed in a blur of productive activity. I threw myself into my garden, transplanting perennials and fertilizing the vegetable patch. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, purging closets of things I no longer needed. It felt symbolic, like I was clearing out the clutter of my old life to make way for something new. With every task I completed, I felt lighter, more in control than I had in months. I was reclaiming my space, my home, my life. On Saturday afternoon, just as I was sitting down with a cup of tea and a book, my phone rang. Charles's name flashed on the screen. My heart gave a triumphant leap. It was showtime. I took a deep breath, composed my features into an expression of mild concern, and answered the phone. "Hey," I said, my voice infused with feigned cheerfulness. "How's the camping trip going? Are you having fun?" His voice came through the line, strained and irritable. "Terrible. This has been the worst night of my life. I've been up all night." I injected my tone with just the right amount of wifely concern. "Oh no. What happened? Did it rain?" There was a pause, and then he hissed into the phone, his voice a low growl of frustration. "Ents, ents," I repeated, as if this were the most baffling thing I had ever heard. "Yes, ents," he practically yelled. "Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. They were everywhere. Alex, everywhere. In my sleeping bag. In my clothes. In my food. I've got bites all over my body. It's a nightmare." I moved to my garden window, gazing out at my perfectly maintained roses as I crafted my response. "That's awful. Honey, how strange. Did anyone else have the same problem? What about your friends?" There was another telling pause on the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head as he tried to navigate his own web of lies. "No," he finally admitted, his voice tight with annoyance. "Just me. I must have set up my tent right on top of a colony or something. A colossal bit of bad luck." "Oh, you poor thing," I cooed sympathetically. "Are you coming home early?" I already knew the answer. He couldn't come home. He would have to explain why none of his friends came home with him. "No," he said quickly, just as I predicted. "No, we're going to move to a different spot. Miles away. It should be fine. I'm not going to let a few bugs ruin the whole weekend." I nodded to myself. Of course he wouldn't. He wasn't camping with co-workers. The camping trip was his cover for a romantic weekend with Tiffany, and he wasn't about to let a little infestation or a full-blown biblical plague of ants. In this case cut that short. "Well, be careful," I said, my voice dripping with concern he didn't deserve. "Maybe check the ground better this time before you set up." Yeah, he replied distractedly. "Listen, I've got to go. We're packing up now." "Okay. Love you," I said, a little test to see how he'd respond. Another pause, this one longer. "You too," he said, the words sounding clipped and forced. "Bye." The line went dead. I set my phone down on the counter, a small, satisfied smile playing at my lips. It was working. It was working perfectly. The antitractant had done its job, making him miserable without revealing my hand in any way. It was an act of nature, a fluke, a bit of bad luck. He would never suspect a thing. Phase 2 of my plan was now complete. Now for the truly important part. Phase 3. With Charles and his mistress presumably relocating to a less ant-infested love nest, I had the rest of the weekend to myself. My newfound freedom was intoxicating. I spent the remainder of Saturday preparing for my new life, moving with a clarity and purpose that felt like a superpower. The grief and confusion had been burned away by my anger, leaving behind a core of pure, unadulterated resolve. My first stop was the bank. I walked into the cool, marble-floored lobby of our joint bank and requested a meeting with the manager, a woman I had met at several community functions. I calmly explained that I was making some personal financial changes and needed to withdraw a significant sum from our joint savings account. Not everything that would be too obvious and could trigger legal alarms, but I took out enough to provide a substantial financial cushion, enough to secure a new apartment, hire the best lawyer, and live comfortably for months without needing another dime from him. The transfer was clean and untraceable to an outside observer. It was simply a large withdrawal, one that I, as a co-owner of the account, was fully entitled to make. Next, I called a friend from college who had become a formidable family law attorney in Boston. While she didn't handle divorces herself, she knew exactly who did. She gave me the name and number of a woman she described as a velvet-gloved shark, a lawyer renowned for her sharp intellect and unwavering dedication to her clients. I left a message, scheduling a consultation for Monday morning. The act of making that call was empowering. a concrete step toward severing the ties that had bound me to a life built on lies. The rest of the day was spent sorting through my personal belongings. I moved through our house not as a resident, but as an archivist, cataloging what was truly important to me. I packed boxes with my treasured books, family heirlooms passed down from my grandmother, and the research journals that chronicled my professional life. I carefully wrapped the small, handcrafted pots that held my most precious plant specimens. I sorted through clothes, creating piles for donation, discarding anything that reminded me of him or the person I used to be when I was with him. The woman who wore those clothes was gone. She was naive, too trusting, too willing to silence her own intuition. I was leaving her behind along with the wilting orchid and the ghost of our marriage. By Sunday afternoon, I was ready. The house was spotless, a pristine stage for the final act. Dinner was in the Ovena complex, slow-cooked beef bourguignon that filled the air with a rich, comforting aroma. It was a meal that suggested love, care, and domestic tranquility, a perfect piece of misdirection. I showered and dressed with deliberate care. I chose one of my most flattering outfits, a deep emerald silk blouse that brought out the green in my hazel eyes, paired with well-fitted black pants and low heels. I styled my chestnut hair in soft waves that fell around my shoulders, and applied my makeup with a steady hand. If this was to be the final confrontation of my marriage, I would face it looking not like a victim, but like a woman in complete control of her destiny. Charles's SUV pulled into the driveway just after 6 o'clock. Through the kitchen window, I watched him unload his gear. He moved stiffly, his shoulders hunched, and I saw him pause to vigorously scratch his arm. A small, cruel smile touched my lips. The itching would be reaching its peak right about now. I turned back to the stove, stirring the stew that had been simmering for hours, my expression serene. The back door opened and he entered, dropping his bags on the floor with a heavy, frustrated thud. "Welcome home," I called out without turning around. "Dinner's almost ready. I hope you're hungry." "I need a shower first," he grumbled, his voice thick with irritation as he headed for the stairs. "You wouldn't believe the weekend I've had. It was a complete disaster." "Take your time," I replied evenly. "The food will be waiting when you're done." 20 minutes later, he descended the stairs wearing fresh clothes, his dark hair still damp from the shower. He looked exhausted. I could see the red welts of ant bites dotting his neck and wrists. He had tried to cover them, but they were angry and inflamed. I had set the dining room table with our good china, linen napkins, and lit candles. It was another detail designed for my performance, a visual cue of a loving wife welcoming her husband home. "This looks nice," he commented, taking his usual seat at the head of the table. He looked at me, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion," I smiled, bringing the heavy pot to the table and serving him a generous portion. "Just happy to have you home. I missed you." He seemed to relax, the suspicion fading as he took in the scene, the beautiful table, the delicious-smelling food, his apologetic, doting wife. He was a man who believed his own narrative, and in his story, he was the hero who had successfully navigated a minor marital crisis and was now being rewarded for his troubles. We ate in relative silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the clinking of silverware against china. I watched him as he ate, occasionally scratching at the red bites on his wrists. Those bites looked painful, I observed, my tone dripping with sympathy. "Maybe you should see a doctor. They're just ant bites," he dismissed, clearly not wanting to talk about his miserable weekend any further. "They'll go away." "So," I said casually, refilling his wine glass. "How was the rest of the camping trip after the ant situation? Did you guys manage to find a better spot?" The question was his cue, relaxed by the wine and the comforting meal, and believing he was on safe ground. Charles launched into an elaborate, detailed story. He spoke of catching a massive trout in a clear, fast-moving stream. He described a challenging hike to a scenic overlook with his co-workers, Dave and Mark. He recounted their hilarious campfire conversations and the terrible instant coffee They had to endure. It was a masterpiece of fiction, delivered with the confidence of a seasoned liar. I listened attentively, nodding at all the right moments, asking clarifying questions. Wow, a real trout? I thought you said that river was fished out. Was the view from the top worth the climb? I played my part to perfection, all the while knowing that every single word out of his mouth was a fabrication. Dave and Mark were probably at home with their own families, completely unaware they had just spent the weekend camping with my husband. Sounds wonderful, I said when he finally finished, my voice warm and admiring. Despite the ants. Of course, it was good to get away, he agreed, leaning back in his chair, a contented look on his face. He believed his lies had been accepted without question. He was safe, though I missed sleeping in our bed. I smiled thinly. I'm sure you did. The meal was over. The time for games was at an end. I stood up and began clearing the dishes, carrying them into the kitchen. Charles remained at the table, finishing the last of his wine, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break. When I returned to the dining room, I wasn't carrying dessert. I was holding my phone. By the way, I said, my voice suddenly losing all its warmth. It was as cold and sharp as surgical steel. I was just wondering something. He looked up, sensing the abrupt shift in the atmosphere. What? I was wondering if Tiffany got bitten by the ants, too. He froze, his wine glass halfway to his lips. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a pasty, grayish color. What did you say? I took a slow, deliberate step toward the table. Tiffany Andrews, I clarified. My eyes locked on his. Your 28-year-old girlfriend from the marketing firm. Did she get bitten by the ants this weekend? Or was she spared, since it was only your clothes and sleeping bag that were treated with the pheromonal attractant? He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. For the first time in our marriage, Charles Fleming was speechless. Alex, I don't know what you're talking about. Who is Tiffany? The denial was pathetic, an instinctive reflex from a cornered animal. I unlocked my phone and turned the screen toward him. It displayed the photo Frank had shown me at the cafe, the photo of him and Tiffany at the Westbrook Hotel, his arm around her, their faces alight with a desire he hadn't shown me in years. Don't insult my intelligence by lying anymore. Charles, I said, my voice quiet but shaking with repressed rage. The game is over. I know everything. He stared at the photo on my phone, his expression cycling rapidly through shock, then anger, and finally, a cold, hard calculation. The charming, confident mask he wore for the world had crumbled, revealing the desperate man beneath. Where did you get that? He demanded, his voice a low growl. Does it matter? I asked, sliding the phone back into my pocket. The point is, I have it, along with the receipt for the $800 gold bracelet you bought for her 2 weeks ago. The one you've got hidden in the bottom drawer of your office desk, under the old tax files. His jaw tightened. He set his wine glass down on the table with a sharp click, his mind visibly racing, searching for an escape route, a new lie that could contain the damage. Alex, this isn't what it looks like. She's just a colleague. We were having a business dinner, discussing. Stop. I cut him off, my voice sharp as a blade. The sound of it seemed to startle him. He had never heard that tone from me before. Just stop. For months, you have made me question my own sanity. You called me paranoid. You told me I was crazy. You gaslight me into believing that I was imagining things when my intuition was screaming at me that something was profoundly wrong. No. More. Lies. His expression hardened, shifting from defense to offense. It was a classic tactic of his. When caught. Attack. You went through my office. You put something on my clothes. What the hell is wrong with you? A laugh escaped my lips. A bitter, humorless sound that seemed to fill the silent room. What's wrong with me? I repeated, my voice rising with an incredulity that bordered on hysteria. You've been cheating on me for months, lying to my face every single day, systematically making me feel like I was losing my mind. And you have the audacity to ask what's wrong with me. It was just a fling. Charles insisted, changing tactics again, his voice becoming placating. It didn't mean anything. She doesn't mean anything to me. Is that supposed to make me feel better? I shot back. That you were willing to destroy our 11-year marriage, our history, our home, for something that didn't mean anything? I wasn't going to leave you, he said, his voice pleading now. He reached for my hand across the table, but I snatched it away as if his touch were poison. It was just a distraction, a stupid mistake. We can work through this. Alex, people overcome affairs all the time. We can go to counseling. I looked at him, truly looked at him, across the flickering candlelight, and I saw a stranger. The affair isn't why I'm leaving you. Charles, he blinked, clearly caught off guard. What? I think I could have eventually forgiven an affair. I continued, my voice becoming eerily calm as the final, absolute truth of my decision settled over me. People make mistakes. Relationships get complicated. I understand that. But what I can't forgive, what I will never forgive, is how you manipulated me, how you deliberately and repeatedly made me doubt my own perception of reality, how you looked me in the eyes, day after day, and convinced me I was being irrational when I was absolutely, 100% right. You didn't just betray our marriage, you betrayed my trust in myself. That is unforgivable. His expression darkened. He saw that his pleading wasn't working. You're overreacting. I never said you were crazy. Your exact words were, this paranoia has to stop. I countered, my memory sharp and clear. Tuesday morning, in our kitchen, when I tried, for the 10th time, to talk to you about my concerns. You said my suspicions were baseless. You made me feel pathetic for even having them. I was trying to protect you, to protect our marriage, he argued, his voice rising again in frustration. What was I supposed to do? Admit everything the first time you got suspicious and blow up our entire lives? You were supposed to be honest. I shot back, my composure finally cracking, the tears I had refused to shed now stinging my eyes. Or better yet, you were supposed to be faithful to the vows you made to me in front of God and everyone we love. But if you couldn't manage to do either of those things, you should have at least had the decency not to dismantle my sanity piece by piece, to cover your tracks. We stared at each other across the table, the candles flickering between us, casting long, dancing shadows on our faces. In that moment, I saw him clearly for perhaps the first time in our relationship, not as the charming, ambitious man I had fallen in love with, but as someone capable of profound deception and a quiet, insidious form of emotional cruelty. What happens now? He finally asked, his voice quieter, resigned. I'm leaving. I said simply, I've already packed what matters to me. I have an appointment with a divorce lawyer tomorrow morning to begin the proceedings. His eyes widened in genuine shock. He had assumed this was a fight, a negotiation. He never imagined it was a declaration. You can't be serious. Alex, this is just a fight. We can fix this. I'll end things with Tiffany right now. I'll do whatever it takes. It's too late, I replied, standing up from the table. The finality in my own voice gave me strength. My suitcases are by the front door. I'll be staying at a hotel until I find a place of my own. This is our home, he protested, gesturing around the beautifully appointed room, at the life he thought was still his. You can't just walk away from everything we've built together. Watch me, I said, turning and walking out of the dining room. I moved toward the stairs where my carefully prepared luggage was waiting. As I passed the hall table, I paused, and Charles, I said, looking back at him over my shoulder, you might want to see a doctor about those ant bites. I used a particularly potent attractant I acquired for my research. The itching could last for weeks. He followed me into the hallway, his earlier contrition giving way to a new, explosive anger. The truth of my little experiment had finally dawned on him. You deliberately set me up. You knew I wasn't camping. You wanted me to suffer. I didn't deny it. I methodically began to wheel my suitcases toward the front door. Yes, I did. I said calmly. Consider it a parting gift. A small, tangible taste of the psychological discomfort you've been causing me for months. You won't get away with this. He threatened, his voice low and menacing. He took a step toward me, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of fear. I'll fight you for everything. The house, the savings, all of it. I will leave you with nothing. I turned to face him one last time, my fear replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I had anticipated this. Go ahead. But before you do, you should know that my lawyer has been provided with copies of all your communications with Tiffany. The texts, the emails, the hotel reservations, the ones you thought you deleted from your cloud backup. My friend in the IT department at your company was very helpful in recovering them. It was a complete and utter bluff. I had no such evidence, but the flicker of pure panic in his eyes told me I had hit the mark. There were communications, and he didn't want them revealed. You're bluffing, he said, but the uncertainty had crept into his voice, robbing it of its power. Am I? I challenged, raising an eyebrow. You thought I was just a paranoid, emotional woman whose concerns could be brushed aside. You underestimated me. Charles, don't make that mistake again. I wheeled my suitcases past him and opened the front door. He remained frozen in the hallway, watching me go, his face a mixture of shock, fury, and the dawning realization that he had completely and irrevocably lost control of the situation. At the door, I paused and looked back at the home I had loved, at the man I had once believed would be my partner for life. My mother always told me that a woman's intuition never fails. I said softly, I should have trusted mine sooner. With that, I walked out, closing the door firmly behind me. The solid, definitive click of the latch echoed in the quiet suburban night. As I loaded my suitcases into my car, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not sorrow or anger, but a profound sense of liberation. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I was trusting myself completely. My mind was clear. My path forward was uncertain, but it was undeniably my own. As I drove away from the house, away from the shattered remains of my marriage, I glanced at the glove compartment. Sometimes, it took something small and seemingly insignificant to bring down the most carefully constructed deceptions. And sometimes, the most effective revenge wasn't about causing pain, but about reclaiming your own power, your own truth, and walking away with your dignity intact. The itching would eventually fade, but the knowledge of how thoroughly he had been outplayed would, I hoped, linger for a very long time. 3 weeks later, I sat in a sunlit corner of my new apartment, surrounded by the green, living things that had made the journey with me. The space was smaller than the house, a one-bedroom unit in a modern building in Cambridge, just a short drive from the Arboretum, but it was filled with light, and more importantly, it was filled with peace. It was mine. The transition had been a whirlwind of logistics and emotions, but each box I unpacked, each picture I hung on the wall, felt like a deliberate act of reclaiming my life. Each day brought a renewed sense of independence. The divorce proceedings had begun more smoothly than I'd anticipated. My bluff had worked better than I could have ever imagined. Charles, despite his initial threats, had become surprisingly cooperative after his lawyers spoke with mine. Whether it was the fear of having his sordid communications exposed or simply the cold realization that fighting would only prolong the inevitable and cost him more in the end, he had agreed to a relatively equitable division of assets. We would sell the house and split the proceeds. We would divide our savings. We would go our separate ways with a minimum of legal entanglement. It was a clean, surgical cut. My phone chimed with a text message. It was from my colleague Diane, checking if we were still on for dinner that evening. I smiled and typed back a confirmation, a wave of gratitude washing over me. In the chaos of the last few weeks, my friendships had become my anchor. I had been surprised and deeply moved by how many people rallied around me once I shared a carefully edited version of what had happened. I didn't need to tell them the details about the ants or the psychological warfare. The simple, painful truth of his betrayal was enough for them to understand. As I set my phone down, my gaze fell on the small business card propped against my desk lamp. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, Ph.D., licensed clinical psychologist. I'd been seeing Rebecca twice a week since leaving Charles, working through the complicated tangle of emotions that came with the end of my marriage. It was in her quiet, comfortable office that I had come to understand the true depth of the damage. The gaslighting had left deeper scars than the infidelity itself. They were wounds to my sense of reality, to the fundamental trust I had in my own mind. And they needed careful, patient healing. The goal isn't to never be hurt again. Alexandra, Rebecca had told me in our last session, her voice calm and steady. That's impossible. The goal is to trust yourself enough to know when something isn't right, and to honor that knowledge, even if no one else validates it. I had been doing precisely that. I was learning to listen to that quiet inner voice again, to treat my intuition not as a symptom of paranoia, but as my most vital and valuable sense. The process was challenging, but with every passing day, I felt more grounded, more like myself. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. I wasn't expecting any visitors, and for a fleeting moment, a familiar flutter of anxiety tightened in my chest. Was it Charles? He knew my new address from the legal paperwork, though he had never shown up unannounced. I approached the door cautiously and peered through the peephole. It wasn't Charles standing in the pristine, brightly lit hallway. It was Frank. I hesitated for a moment before opening the door. I hadn't spoken to Frank since that day at the Riverside Cafe, the day he had handed me the terrible, liberating truth. In the whirlwind of leaving my husband and establishing a new life, I'd almost forgotten about his crucial role in my awakening. Frank, I said, my voice filled with surprise as I opened the door. This is unexpected. He stood awkwardly in the hallway, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. He looked uncomfortable, out of his element. Hey, Alex, I hope it's okay that I stopped by. Charles mentioned your new address during one of his rants. I stepped back, gesturing for him to enter. Come in. Of course. Can I get you something to drink? Water? Coffee? Coffee would be great, if it's not too much trouble, he replied, following me inside. He looked around the apartment, his eyes taking in the stacks of books, the rows of potted plants, the simple, clean furniture. Nice place. It suits you. Thanks, I said, moving to the small, efficient kitchen area to prepare the coffee. It's still a work in progress, but it feels like mine. That's what matters, he said, settling onto one of the bar stools at my kitchen counter. We fell into a slightly awkward silence as I measured coffee grounds and filled the machine with water. The quiet hum of the coffee maker seemed to amplify the unspoken questions hanging in the air between us. So, I finally said, leaning against the counter as I waited for the coffee to brew, what brings you by? Frank ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I recognized. I wanted to check on you, see how you're doing with everything. I'm doing better than I expected, I admitted honestly, taking it one day at a time. But mostly, I feel relieved. That's good. He nodded. And I also wanted to apologize. I raised an eyebrow in confusion. Apologize? For what? You told me the truth when no one else would. If anything, I owe you a huge debt of gratitude. Maybe, Frank acknowledged, his gaze dropping to the countertop. But I knew for weeks before I said anything. I watched you at that dinner party 2 months ago. I saw how stressed you were. I could tell you were questioning yourself, and I stayed silent because of some misguided loyalty to Charles. I'm sorry I waited so long. The coffee maker beeped, signaling it was done. I turned to pour the cups, using the small, practical task as a moment to gather my thoughts. I slid a mug across the counter toward him. You did eventually tell me, I said gently. That's the part that matters. He accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. He's not speaking to me anymore, he said quietly. Charles, he knows it was me who told you. I frowned. I never said your name. I promised I wouldn't. You didn't have to, Frank said with a wry, sad smile. There were only 3 people in the world who knew about him and Tiffany. Charles, Tiffany, and me. It was a simple process of elimination. He took a sip of his coffee. He came to my apartment the night you left him. I've never seen him so angry, so full of rage. I felt a sharp twinge of guilt. I'm so sorry, Frank. I know he was your friend for a very long time. Don't you dare apologize, Frank said firmly, his eyes meeting mine. He made his choices. We all did. And frankly, he added, staring into his coffee mug as if searching for the right words, I'm not sure our friendship was ever as genuine as I thought it was. What do you mean? The more I've reflected on things since this all happened, the more I've realized that Charles's loyalty has always been conditional. He's charming and confident, which makes people want to be around him. But he's always putting himself first. His needs, his ambitions, his desires. I never wanted to see it before. I understood that feeling all too well. The willful blindness, the reluctance to see the truth about someone you cared for. How did you know? I asked suddenly. About Tiffany? I mean, you said you suspected something even before you saw them at the hotel. Frank grimaced. Remember that business conference in Phoenix 3 months ago? The one he told you he was going to alone? I nodded. Well, Tiffany was there too. I saw them together at the airport. I was there picking up my sister from her flight. They didn't see me. But the way they were with each other, it wasn't professional. It was intimate. And you didn't say anything then. I said, not as an accusation, but as a simple statement of fact. No, he admitted, his cheeks flushing slightly with shame. He was my best friend since college. I told myself it might be innocent, that I was jumping to conclusions. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. Then I started noticing other things. How he'd guard his phone when we were out for drinks. How he'd step away to take hushed calls. Little things that added up. I nodded slowly. The same things I was noticing. The night I saw them at the Westbrook. It was undeniable. Frank continued. He came to my place the next morning. Like I told you. He admitted everything, but swore it was just physical, that he still loved you. He begged me not to tell you, but you did. I said softly. It took me a few days to work up the courage. Frank confessed. I kept thinking about how he'd been treating you. I heard him on the phone with you that week, and he used that same condescending tone, calling you paranoid. My sister went through something similar with her ex-husband. The gaslighting. By the time she finally left him, she barely trusted her own perceptions anymore. I couldn't stand by and watch that happen to you. I felt a rush of profound gratitude toward this man. This quiet, decent man who had risked a decades-long friendship to do what he knew was right. Thank you, Frank, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Truly. He shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with my gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. No, I said firmly. They wouldn't have. Many people would have minded their own business, stayed out of it. You chose to get involved, knowing you'd likely lose Charles's friendship. That took real courage. His cheeks reddened slightly at my praise. As he opened his mouth to say something, I saw a flicker of the old, easygoing Frank. He was a good man, maybe one of the best I knew. And in that moment, I was simply glad he was sitting here, in my new, sunlit kitchen, a friend who had shown up when it counted. How are you really doing, Alex? Frank asked, his tone shifting from apologetic to genuinely concerned. Beyond the polite "I'm fine" answer, I considered the question, appreciating his desire for honesty. Some days are harder than others, I admitted, tracing the rim of my coffee mug. I'm angry at Charles, of course, but I'm also angry at myself for not trusting my instincts sooner, for letting him convince me I was the problem. I'm sad for the future I thought we had, but mostly I'm just relieved. There's something incredibly freeing about finally knowing the truth, even when it's painful. I can understand that. Frank nodded. He hesitated for a moment, then asked carefully, And what about her? Have you heard anything about Tiffany? I shook my head. I've made a conscious effort not to ask about either of them. They're part of a chapter that's closed. Well, for what it's worth, Charles ended things with her the day after you left, Frank said. At least, that's what I heard through the grapevine before he cut me off. Apparently, he blamed her for the collapse of his marriage. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Of course he did. Heaven forbid Charles should ever take responsibility for his own actions. Exactly. Frank agreed. Always someone else's fault. A classic move. A question that had been lingering in the back of my mind finally found its way to my lips. Why did you really come here today? Frank. He looked startled by my directness. I told you. To check on you. To apologize. I think there's more to it than that. I pressed gently. I can sense it. He set his coffee mug down, a wry smile crossing his face. There's that famous intuition of yours. Can't get anything past it. He took a deep breath. You're right. I was worried. I was worried that you might think I had ulterior motives for telling you about Charles and Tiffany, that I might have wanted something in return. Understanding dawned on me. You thought I might believe you told me so you could. What? Swoop in after my marriage ended? He nodded, looking profoundly embarrassed. It sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud, but Charles suggested as much when he came to my apartment that night. He accused me of always having feelings for you, of trying to sabotage his marriage so I could have you. It was a nasty, desperate thing to say, but it got in my head. I felt a surge of indignation on his behalf. Even at the end, Charles was still trying to twist the narrative, to poison the one honest relationship that had emerged from his web of lies. That's not why you told me, I stated with absolute certainty. No, Frank confirmed, his gaze steady and sincere. It wasn't. I told you because it was the right thing to do, because you deserved to know the truth. Period. I believe you. I said simply, and I did. Completely. Frank's shoulders relaxed, a visible wave of relief washing over him. Thank you, Alex. That means a lot. As he stood to leave a few minutes later, I walked him to the door. You're welcome here anytime, Frank, I said. And thank you again, not just for telling me the truth, but for checking on me now. It means more than you know. After he left, I felt a curious sense of closure. The conversation with Frank had answered the last of my lingering questions, putting to rest any nagging doubts. I returned to my plants, my green, silent companions. I gently touched a leaf of my favorite orchid, the very one that had started to wilt on my kitchen windowsill all those weeks ago. It was thriving now in its new environment, in the clean air of my new life. It had put out new, strong roots and was even growing a promising new flower spike. Plants were resilient that way. Given the right conditions, light, and care, they could recover from almost anything. I was beginning to believe that people could, too. 6 months had passed since I walked out of my marriage. Autumn had given way to winter, winter to a tentative spring, and now the first real warmth of early summer filled the air with the scent of possibility. My apartment had transformed from a temporary shelter into a true home, each corner reflecting a personality I was rediscovering. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago. The house had sold. The assets had been divided. The final legal document had arrived in the mail, officially marking the end of an era. Today marked another milestone, my 40th birthday. I had woken up feeling not older, but more myself than I had ever felt before. I had taken the day off work to celebrate in my own quiet way, starting with coffee on my small balcony, watching the sunrise paint the Boston skyline in delicate pinks and golds. Around noon, as I was repotting a vibrant peace lily, my doorbell rang. It was a delivery person with a stunning arrangement of flowers, not the typical roses or lilies, but a carefully curated selection of native wildflowers and unusual botanicals that only a true plant lover would appreciate. The card was simple, for new growth and stronger roots. Happy birthday, Frank. I smiled, touched by his thoughtfulness and the perfect metaphor. Our friendship had deepened into something steady and valuable, built on a foundation of mutual respect and quiet understanding. Later that afternoon, I drove to the Arboretum. I had recently accepted a promotion to lead researcher of the new Sustainable Agriculture Department. The position had come as a surprise, but the director had sought me out specifically, impressed by my innovative research into natural pest deterrence. That ant-attractant project alone deserves recognition. He had told me, your application of pheromone science to sustainable farming could revolutionize how we protect crops. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very compound I had used to expose a private betrayal had become the cornerstone of my professional advancement. Life had a curious way of creating purpose from pain. That evening, my friends threw me a surprise party at my favorite neighborhood restaurant. As I walked in, a cheer went up from the 15 or so people gathered there, a group of friends and colleagues who had become my chosen family. Frank stood slightly apart from the group, watching me with a warm smile. When our eyes met across the room, something unspoken passed between theme appreciation, affection, possibility. "Happy birthday," he said, when I finally made my way to him. "40 looks good on you." "Thank you," I replied, my voice full of a confidence I wouldn't have possessed a year ago. "For everything. For the flowers. For being here tonight. But mostly, for being a true friend when I needed one most. You know," Frank said as we shared a piece of decadent chocolate cake later, "I've been meaning to ask you something. Would you be interested in collaborating on that community garden project I mentioned? The one for the children's hospital?" My interest was immediately piqued. He had spoken before about his volunteer work designing therapeutic green spaces, and I'd always been fascinated. "I'd love to," I replied without hesitation. "What did you have in mind?" As he outlined his vision for a garden that would help children heal through interaction with nature, I felt a familiar spark of excitement. This was exactly the kind of meaningful work I wanted to do, combining my botanical expertise with a tangible human impact. "We could start planning next week, if you're not too busy," Frank suggested. "Maybe over dinner?" There was a slight hesitation in his voice, a careful testing of boundaries that I found both respectful and endearing. "Dinner would be perfect," I agreed, making a decision that felt right in every way. It wasn't a rush toward something new, but a natural, gentle progression of something that had been quietly growing between us all along. Later, as the party wound down, Frank walked me to my car. The night was warm, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of flowering trees. "You know," he said, his expression thoughtful, "I've been thinking a lot about intuition lately, about how you knew something was wrong in your marriage, long before you had any evidence. It took me too long to trust what I was feeling," I admitted. "That's the lesson I'm trying not to forget, to listen to that inner voice, even when the rest of the world is telling you you're wrong." "So what's that voice telling you now?" Frank asked softly, his eyes searching mine in the dim light of the parking lot. I looked at him at the gentle intelligence in his eyes, the quiet strength in his bearing, the genuine care he had consistently shown me, and my intuition, no longer clouded by doubt or fear, spoke clearly. "It's telling me that some endings are really just beginnings in disguise," I said. "That trust, once broken, can be rebuilt stronger than before, and that sometimes the right people come into our lives in the most unexpected ways, exactly when we need them." A slow smile spread across his face, reaching his eyes. "That's quite a profound inner voice you've got there." I laughed, a sound of pure, unburdened joy. "It's been through a lot. To new beginnings." "Then," he said, not as a question, but as a shared statement of hope. "To new beginnings," I agreed. As I drove home beneath a canopy of stars, a profound sense of peace settled over me. The path forward wasn't entirely clear, and that was okay. I had learned to trust the journey, to believe in my own wisdom, to recognize truth when I saw it. My 41st year was just beginning, full of promise and possibility. I had my work, my friends, my newfound confidence, and most importantly, I had myself whole and healing. Intuitive and strong, my mother's words echoed in my mind, no longer a warning, but a simple, powerful truth. A woman's intuition never fails. And now, after everything, I finally, completely, believed her.